Maria Santos pushed through the heavy glass door of Café Europa, the little bell above jingling its familiar tune. 23 years old and still fighting her way through college, she tied her apron around her waist and took a deep breath. Another day, another shift of watching people struggle with the most confusing menu in all of Seattle. The morning rush was already starting. Business people in their neat suits hurried in, looking for quick coffee and breakfast before heading to their offices downtown. Maria had been working here for 8 months now, and she knew the routine by heart. But what never stopped bothering her was watching customers squint at the menu, their faces scrunched up in confusion, trying to figure out what they were actually ordering. She grabbed her notepad and walked over to table 3, where a middle-aged woman was staring at the menu like it was written in ancient code. "Can I help you with anything?" Maria asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Even after all these months, talking to strangers still made her nervous. What exactly is chicken of surprise?" the woman asked, pointing at the menu with a puzzled expression. Maria's cheeks turned pink. She knew it was supposed to be chicken surprise, a simple grilled chicken dish with herbs. But the menu had been translated so poorly that it sounded like some kind of mystery meat. "It's just grilled chicken with herbs and vegetables," she explained quietly. The woman nodded, still looking confused. "And what about this beef that runs? Is that some kind of special preparation?" Maria wanted to disappear under the floor. "Beef stew," she whispered. "It's beef stew with potatoes and carrots. This happened every single day. Multiple times a day, customers would come in excited to try this little international cafe they'd heard about, only to spend 10 minutes trying to decode a menu that made no sense. Some people laughed about it. Others got frustrated and left. A few brave souls would ask Maria to explain, and she'd quietly translate the real meaning of each dish. The worst part was that Maria knew exactly what was wrong. Growing up in Colombia, she'd learned English, Spanish, French, and even some Italian from her grandmother. Languages came naturally to her, like music or art came to other people. She could spot translation errors from across the room. But her manager, Tony, had made it very clear on her first day that waitresses were there to take orders, not give opinions about the business. "You just focus on getting the orders right and keeping the customers happy," he'd told her, his voice stern. "Leave the business decisions to people who know what they're doing." So Maria kept quiet, even though she watched potential customers walk out every day because they couldn't understand what they were ordering. Even though she saw the frustration on people's faces when they received something completely different from what they expected. Even though she knew she could fix this problem with just a few hours and a better translation app. The cafe itself was actually beautiful. Large windows let in plenty of natural light, and the walls were decorated with pictures from different countries around the world. There were small flags from Italy, France, Spain, Germany, and a dozen other places. The owner, Mr. Rodriguez, had dreamed of creating a place where people from all cultures could come together and enjoy good food. But the language barrier was killing that dream, one confused customer at a time. Around 10:30, Maria noticed him walk in. The older gentleman who came in every Tuesday and Thursday, always sitting at table 7 by the window. She'd started thinking of him as Tuesday-Thursday man, since she'd never heard his name. He looked to be in his 60s with salt and pepper hair that was always neatly combed. His clothes were simple but well-made. Clean pressed pants, button-down shirts, and a light jacket that looked expensive without being flashy. What struck Maria most about him was how he carried himself. There was something dignified about the way he walked, the way he sat up straight, the way he folded his hands on the table while reading the menu. He seemed like someone who was used to being in charge, though he never demanded attention or acted rude to the staff. But every time he came in, Maria watched the same scene unfold. He'd sit down, pick up the menu, and his eyebrows would furrow together as he tried to make sense of it. She'd seen him mouth words to himself, clearly trying to figure out what traditional sheep herder's cake was supposed to be. He'd look around the cafe, maybe hoping to see what other people were eating. Sometimes he'd gesture toward another table, pointing at someone's plate. Most of the time, he'd end up ordering just coffee and a pastry, something safe, something he could point to in the display case without having to decode the menu. Maria could tell this frustrated him. She'd catch him glancing longingly at the hot food other customers were enjoying, dishes that were probably exactly what he wanted but couldn't figure out how to order. The other waitresses didn't seem to notice his struggle. They'd take his simple order, coffee, black, and that blueberry muffin in the case, and move on to the next table. But Maria noticed everything. She noticed how he'd sigh quietly when he had to settle for just coffee again. She noticed how he'd linger over the menu even after ordering, still trying to crack its mysterious code. She noticed how his face would light up when he saw other customers enjoying full meals, and how disappointed he looked when he had to stick to his safe choices. One Thursday morning, Maria watched him try to ask Jenny, another waitress, about something on the menu. He pointed to beef that runs and made a questioning gesture. Jenny, who'd only been working there for 3 weeks and spoke only English, just shrugged and said, "I think it's some kind of beef dish. You want to try it?" The gentleman looked uncertain. He'd been burned before by unclear menu items. He shook his head politely and ordered his usual coffee and muffin. After Jenny walked away, Maria saw him glance once more at the menu, then fold it and set it aside with a small sigh. That moment hit Maria harder than usual. This kind, dignified man had been coming here twice a week for months, probably hoping each time that he'd be brave enough to try something new, or that somehow the menu would make more sense. Instead, he was stuck in this cycle of confusion and safe choices. Maria knew she could help him. She knew exactly what every item on the menu was supposed to be. She'd grown up with half these dishes in her grandmother's kitchen. But her shyness held her back like a heavy blanket. What if she said something wrong? What if Tony saw her bothering customers with unsolicited advice? What if the gentleman thought she was being presumptuous or rude? So she stayed quiet, refilling coffee cups and taking simple orders, watching this small tragedy play out twice a week. The language barrier wasn't just preventing people from enjoying good food. It was keeping them from connecting with the warm, welcoming place that Café Europa was supposed to be. And Maria, with all her language skills and cultural knowledge, felt powerless to bridge that gap. But sometimes the smallest moments can change everything. And Maria's moment was coming sooner than she thought. Thursday afternoon arrived like a storm. The lunch rush at Café Europa was busier than Maria had ever seen it. Every table was full. There was a line of people waiting by the door, and the kitchen was running behind on orders. Steam rose from coffee machines while plates clattered in the background. The whole place buzzed with the kind of energy that made waitresses like Maria both excited and nervous. Maria hurried between tables, balancing plates on her arms and trying to keep track of who ordered what. Her notepad was filled with scribbles, and her apron already had a few coffee stains from the hectic pace. But even in all this chaos, she kept glancing toward table 7, where her regular Thursday customer sat with his usual patience. Today felt different, though. Mr. Chen, she'd finally learned his name when he'd made a reservation last week, seemed more determined than usual. Instead of immediately closing the menu with his typical resigned sigh, he was studying it carefully. His finger traced across the items, and she could see his lips moving as he tried to sound out the confusing translations. The other waitresses were all swamped. Jenny was handling the big family at table 12, who couldn't decide between 6 different dishes. Lisa was dealing with a business meeting at the corner table, where everyone wanted their orders modified. That left Rebecca to take care of Mr. Chen, and Maria's stomach tightened with worry. Rebecca was a nice enough person, but she'd only been working at the cafe for 2 months. She was still learning where everything was in the kitchen, and English was her second language too. Maria had seen her struggle with the menu translations, just as much as the customers did. Maria watched from across the room as Rebecca approached table 7 with her notepad. "Ready." Mr. Chen looked up with a hopeful smile and pointed to something on the menu. Even from a distance, Maria could see him trying to explain what he wanted, his hands moving as he spoke. Rebecca nodded, but Maria could tell from her expression that she wasn't really understanding. "Traditional sheep herder's cake," Maria heard Mr. Chen say, reading directly from the menu. Is this what I think it is?" Rebecca looked confused. She glanced down at the menu, then back at Mr. Chen. It's cake?" she said uncertainly. "Traditional cake?" Maria's heart started racing. She knew exactly what was happening. Mr. Chen was trying to order the shepherd's pie, ground meat with vegetables topped with mashed potatoes, a hearty British dish that was actually one of the cafe's most popular items. But the menu translation had turned it into sheep herder's cake, which sounded like some kind of dessert. "Yes, I'll try that." Mr. Chen said, though Maria could hear the uncertainty in his voice. And maybe some coffee, too? Rebecca wrote down the order and hurried toward the kitchen, calling out to the cooks. Maria wanted to run after her to explain the mistake, but she was carrying a tray of hot soup to another table. By the time she'd delivered her order, it was too late. 10 minutes later, Maria watched in horror as Rebecca emerged from the kitchen carrying a plate with a large slice of chocolate cake. It was the cafe's traditional German chocolate cake, a rich dessert that was nothing like what Mr. Chen had been hoping for. The moment Rebecca set the plate down in front of him, Maria could see the disappointment wash over his face. His shoulders slumped slightly, and he stared at the chocolate cake like it was a puzzle he couldn't solve. He'd been so hopeful today, so ready to finally try something new, and instead he'd ended up with dessert for lunch. Is this what I ordered?" he asked Rebecca politely, his voice gentle even though Maria could tell he was frustrated. Rebecca looked at the cake, then at her notepad. "You said the traditional sheep herder's cake, right?" "This is our traditional cake." Mr. Chen nodded slowly. He was too kind to make a scene, too polite to send it back. Maria watched as he picked up the fork and took a small bite of chocolate cake, trying to make the best of a situation that had gone completely wrong. That moment broke something inside Maria. She'd been watching this kind gentleman struggle with the menu for months, always settling for coffee and pastries because he couldn't figure out what the real food items were. Today, he'd finally been brave enough to try something new, to step outside his comfort zone, and he'd ended up more confused than ever. But it wasn't just about Mr. Chen. Maria looked around the busy cafe and saw the same story playing out at other tables. A young couple was sharing a confused look over their menus. An elderly woman was pointing at items and asking her daughter what they meant. A businessman had given up entirely and was just ordering whatever's good without knowing what he'd get. These weren't just translation errors, they were barriers keeping people from enjoying good food and feeling welcome. Maria thought about her grandmother back in Colombia, who had taught her that food was about bringing people together, about making everyone feel at home. But how could anyone feel at home when they couldn't even understand what they were ordering? Something shifted inside her like a door opening that had been locked for months. Her usual shyness was still there, but it was suddenly overwhelmed by something stronger, the need to help, to fix this small but important problem. Maria glanced around to make sure Tony wasn't watching, then walked over to the supply station and grabbed a clean napkin. Her hands were shaking slightly as she pulled a pen from her apron pocket. She looked at Mr. Chen again, still politely eating his chocolate cake lunch, and made her decision. "Excuse me," she said softly, approaching his table. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was steady. "I'm so sorry about the confusion with your order." Mr. Chen looked up, his face brightening at her gentle tone. "Oh, it's not a problem. The cake is quite good, actually." Maria's heart went out to him even more. He was being so gracious about the whole mix-up. She took a deep breath and sat down across from him, something she'd never done with a customer before. "The thing is," she began, her words coming slowly but with growing confidence, "I think I know what you were trying to order. The menu here, it's not translated very well." She spread the napkin on the table and started writing. "Traditional sheep herder's cake. That's supposed to be shepherd's pie. It's ground lamb with vegetables, topped with mashed potatoes and baked until golden." Mr. Chen's eyes widened with recognition and relief. "Yes, that's exactly what I was hoping for. I've been trying to figure out these menu items for months." Maria felt a warm rush of satisfaction as she continued writing on the napkin. "And this one here, beef that runs, that's beef stew. Chicken of surprise is just grilled chicken with herbs. Fish that swims in lemon is baked fish with lemon sauce." With each translation she wrote down, Mr. Chen's smile grew wider. "You have no idea how helpful this is," he said, his voice full of genuine gratitude. "I've been coming here for months wanting to try the hot meals, but I never knew what I was ordering." For the next 10 minutes, Maria forgot about her shyness entirely. She explained dish after dish, sharing stories about similar foods from her grandmother's kitchen in Colombia, helping Mr. Chen understand not just what each item was, but why it was good and how it was prepared. When she finally finished, Mr. Chen folded the napkin carefully and put it in his shirt pocket. "Thank you," he said simply. "This means more to me than you know." Maria felt something she'd never experienced before, the pure joy of using her skills to genuinely help someone. As she walked back to work, she realized that this one small act had changed something fundamental. She'd found her voice, and for the first time in months, she felt like she belonged here. The next morning, Maria woke up with a feeling she hadn't experienced in months: excitement about going to work. The memory of Mr. Chen's grateful smile kept replaying in her mind as she got dressed and grabbed her coffee. For the first time since starting at Café Europa, she felt like she'd actually made a difference in someone's day. But as she walked to work, reality started creeping back in. What she'd done yesterday was nice, but it was just one customer, one napkin, one moment. The menu was still a confusing mess for everyone else. Dozens of customers would come in today, struggle with the same translation problems, and either leave frustrated or end up with food they didn't want. The morning shift started normally enough. Maria tied on her apron and began taking orders, but now she couldn't stop noticing every single confused expression, every customer who squinted at the menu like it was written in code. A young mother with 2 small children spent 5 minutes trying to figure out what pasta that dances was supposed to be. An older gentleman pointed randomly at 3 different items before just giving up and ordering coffee. Around 10:30, Mr. Chen walked in for his usual Thursday visit. Maria's heart lifted as she watched him head straight to table 7. But this time was different. Instead of the hesitant, frustrated expression she'd grown used to seeing, his face was bright with anticipation. When Rebecca went over to take his order, Mr. Chen pulled out the napkin Maria had given him the day before. "I'd like the shepherd's pie, please," he said confidently. "The traditional sheep herder's cake on your menu." Rebecca looked confused for a second, but Mr. Chen explained about the translation issue, showing her Maria's handwritten notes. 20 minutes later, Maria watched with pure joy as Mr. Chen took his first bite of the meal he'd been trying to order for months. The satisfaction on his face was worth everything, but that moment also made Maria realize something important. If she could help one person understand the menu, why couldn't she help everyone? She had the language skills, she understood the dishes, and she'd seen firsthand how much difference it could make. That evening, after the cafe closed and the other staff had gone home, Maria stayed behind. She told Tony she wanted to finish cleaning her section, which wasn't entirely a lie. She did wipe down all her tables. But then when the cafe was empty and quiet, she sat down at table 7 with the official menu and a stack of blank paper. This was going to be her secret project. Maria started with the appetizers, writing down each incorrectly translated item and then the proper English version beside it. Cheese that melts in happiness became melted cheese fondue. Bread that speaks French became French bread with herb butter. Item by item, she worked through the entire menu, not just translating but also adding helpful descriptions that would make each dish sound appealing and clear. But she didn't stop at English. Growing up in Colombia, she'd learned that food was a universal language, and Café Europa served customers from all over the world. So she created Spanish and French versions too, making sure each translation was culturally appropriate and accurate. Pollo a la sorpresa instead of chicken of surprise. Ragout de bœuf instead of beef that runs. Each correction felt like solving a small puzzle, and Maria found herself completely absorbed in the work. 2 hours later, she had 3 complete menus: English, Spanish, and French. That actually made sense. She looked at her handwritten pages with satisfaction and pride. These weren't just translations. They were bridges between cultures, ways to make everyone feel welcome and understood. The next day, Maria folded the menus and slipped them into her apron pocket. She wasn't sure how to use them yet, but having them there felt like carrying a secret superpower. Her first opportunity came during the lunch rush. A middle-aged couple sat down at table 4, and Maria could immediately tell they were struggling with the menu. They were speaking quietly in Spanish, pointing at different items and shaking their heads in confusion. "Disculpe," Maria said softly, approaching their table. "¿Necesitan ayuda con el menú?" The woman's face lit up with relief. "Sí, por favor. We can't figure out what any of these dishes are." Maria discreetly pulled out her Spanish translation and placed it next to their official menu. "This might help," she said with a warm smile. "These are what the dishes actually are." For the next 10 minutes, Maria helped them understand each option, explaining ingredients and cooking methods in their native language. The couple ended up ordering a full 3-course meal, their faces glowing with excitement about finally being able to enjoy the food they wanted. Word began spreading in ways Maria never expected. The Spanish-speaking couple told their friends about the helpful waitress who could explain everything. Clearly, Mr. Chen mentioned to his Thursday lunch companion about how much better his dining experience had become. The young mother with children returned the next week specifically asking for the waitress who knows what everything is. Maria started carrying all 3 versions of her menu everywhere, discreetly sharing them with customers who looked confused. She developed a 6th sense for spotting people who needed help. The slight frown when reading the menu, the way someone would point at an item and ask, "What is this exactly?" And the resigned sigh of giving up and ordering something safe. Each successful interaction built her confidence. She learned that a gentle, "Would you like me to explain some of the dishes?" was usually met with grateful enthusiasm. Customers appreciated that she took the time to make sure they understood what they were ordering, and they began requesting her section specifically. The changes were subtle but significant. Tips in her section started increasing because customers were happier with their meals. People lingered longer, ordered more courses, and brought friends back with them. The atmosphere at her tables felt more relaxed and welcoming because nobody was confused or frustrated about their food choices. One evening, while Maria was discreetly helping a French tourist understand the dinner options, she overheard a conversation at a nearby table that made her heart race. "I love coming here now," one customer was saying to her friend. "There's this one waitress who really knows her stuff. She can explain everything on the menu and even suggest what you might like based on what you usually eat." "Really? Which one?" "The young woman with dark hair. She's quiet, but she's incredibly helpful. I've brought 3 different people here in the past 2 weeks just because of her." Maria felt a warm flush of pride mixed with nervous excitement. Her little secret project was working better than she'd ever imagined. But she was also worried about what would happen if Tony found out what she was doing. Technically, she was supposed to stick to taking orders, not providing unauthorized menu assistance. 2 weeks into her secret project, something happened that would change everything. It was a busy Tuesday afternoon when Maria noticed a familiar face at table 7. Mr. Chen was back, but this time he wasn't alone. He'd brought 2 other people with him, a younger man and woman who looked like they might be his adult children. As Maria watched from across the cafe, Mr. Chen pulled out her original napkin with the menu translations. He was showing it to his companions, pointing to different items and explaining what each dish really was. The 3 of them studied her handwriting like it was a treasure map, and Maria could see their excitement building as they realized they could finally understand what they were ordering. When it came time to take their order, all 3 chose complex dishes from the menu, not because they were randomly guessing, but because they knew exactly what they wanted. They ordered appetizers, main courses, and even dessert, turning what usually would have been a coffee and muffin visit into a full dining experience. That moment made Maria realize her project had grown beyond just helping individual customers. She was actually changing how people experienced the entire cafe, turning moments of confusion and frustration into opportunities for connection and enjoyment. But she had no idea that someone very important had been watching all of this unfold, and that her secret project was about to become much less secret. 3 weeks had passed since Maria started her secret menu project, and life at Café Europa felt different in ways both wonderful and terrifying. The wonderful part was watching customers genuinely enjoy their meals, seeing faces light up when they finally understood what they were ordering, and feeling the warm satisfaction that came from helping people connect with good food. The terrifying part was the growing whispers she'd started hearing around the cafe. It was a quiet Wednesday evening, and Maria was staying late again to help close. Most of the staff had already gone home, leaving just her, Tony, and one cook finishing up in the kitchen. Maria was wiping down tables in the main dining room when she heard Tony's voice coming from his small office behind the counter. At first, she wasn't trying to listen. Tony was always on phone calls, talking to suppliers, scheduling staff, dealing with the dozens of small problems that came with running a restaurant. But something about his tone tonight made her stop and pay attention. "I don't know what else to do, Rodriguez," Tony was saying, his voice heavy with frustration. "The numbers just aren't working anymore." Maria's heart started beating faster. Mr. Rodriguez was the owner, the man who had dreamed of creating this international cafe where people from all cultures could feel welcome. She'd only met him a few times, but she knew how much this place meant to him. It's not just the money, Tony continued, and Maria could hear him pacing around his tiny office. It's the complaints. People keep saying they can't understand the menu, that they don't know what they're ordering. Half the customers who come in end up leaving without ordering anything substantial because they're too confused. Maria pressed herself against the wall, feeling guilty for listening but unable to stop herself. Look, I've tried everything I can think of, Tony said. We've had the menu printed and reprinted. I've trained the staff to explain dishes better. But it's not working. People are frustrated, we're losing money, and I don't see how we can turn this around. There was a long pause, and Maria could hear the muffled sound of Mr. Rodriguez's voice on the other end of the phone. I know, Tony replied, but maybe it's time to consider selling. There's been some interest from potential buyers, restaurant consultants, investors, people who might be able to fix what we can't. Maria's world tilted sideways. Selling, Café Europa, the place that had become like a second home to her, might be sold because of the very problem she'd been secretly trying to fix. There's this one guy who's been coming around, Tony continued. Older gentleman, very professional looking. He's been asking questions, watching how we operate. I think he might be evaluating us for a potential purchase. The blood drained from Maria's face. She thought about all the people who had been coming to the cafe lately, all the customers who might be more than they seemed. Could one of them be a potential buyer? Someone who was deciding whether Café Europa was worth saving? I'll set up a meeting for next week, Tony said. Maybe it's time to face reality. Maria finished cleaning in a daze, her mind spinning with worry and guilt. If only Tony knew that she'd been successfully helping customers understand the menu for weeks now. If only she'd been brave enough to present her translations officially, instead of keeping them secret. Maybe she could have prevented this whole crisis. The next morning, Thursday, felt different from the moment Maria walked through the cafe door. Everything looked the same tables, the same flags on the walls, the same confused customers squinting at menus. But now it all felt fragile, temporary, like it might disappear at any moment. Around 10:30, Mr. Chen walked in for his usual Thursday visit. But today something was different about him too. Instead of his typical quiet, unassuming entrance, he seemed more purposeful, more businesslike. He still sat at table 7, but he spent more time looking around the cafe, observing the other customers, watching how the staff interacted with people. Maria tried to focus on her other tables, but she kept glancing over at Mr. Chen. Was he the potential buyer Tony had mentioned? Had he been evaluating the cafe all this time, watching their failures and problems while she'd been trying so hard to help him? The lunch rush was particularly challenging that day. A large group of tourists came in, all speaking different languages and struggling with the menu in ways that would have broken Maria's heart on any other day. Today it just filled her with dread. Every confused expression, every frustrated gesture, every customer who gave up and ordered just coffee felt like another nail in the cafe's coffin. Maria discreetly helped as many people as she could with her translated menus, but she felt like she was trying to stop a flood with a teacup. The problems were bigger than what one shy waitress could fix with handwritten napkins. Around 2 o'clock, when the lunch rush was finally winding down, something unexpected happened. Mr. Chen stood up from his table and walked over to the counter where Tony was working on paperwork. "Excuse me," Mr. Chen said, his voice carrying more authority than Maria had ever heard from him before. "I'd like to speak with the manager, please." Tony looked up, probably expecting a complaint or a simple question. "That's me. What can I help you with?" "My name is David Chen," he said, and Maria felt her heart skip a beat. "I think it's time we had a conversation about your restaurant." The way he said it sent chills down Maria's spine. This wasn't the quiet, uncertain customer she'd been helping for months. This was someone with serious business to discuss. Tony's expression changed immediately. Oh, you're the consultant Rodriguez mentioned might be coming by." "Among other things, yes," Mr. Chen replied. "Could we speak privately?" Maria watched in growing panic as Tony led Mr. Chen toward his office. This was it. The moment when someone would decide whether Café Europa lived or died. And here she was, just a shy waitress who'd been secretly helping customers with handwritten napkins. completely powerless to save the place she'd grown to love. But before they reached the office, Mr. Chen stopped and turned around. His eyes scanned the dining room until they found Maria, who was frozen with a coffee pot in her hands. "Actually," he said, loud enough for her to hear clearly, "I'd like Maria to join us for this conversation." Maria nearly dropped the coffee pot. Tony looked confused, glancing between Mr. Chen and Maria like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Maria?" Tony asked. "What does she have to do with anything?" Mr. Chen's expression softened as he looked at Maria, and for a moment she saw a hint of the kind, patient customer she'd come to know. "Everything," he said simply. "She has everything to do with this." The next few minutes passed in a blur. Maria found herself sitting in Tony's cramped office, her hands shaking slightly as Mr. Chen pulled out a folder full of papers. Business papers. Official-looking documents with letterheads and logos. "I should properly introduce myself," Mr. Chen began, his voice gentle but professional. "My name is David Chen, and I'm a restaurant consultant and investor. I specialize in evaluating dining establishments for potential acquisition and improvement." Maria's worst fears were confirmed, but something in his tone suggested this conversation might not go the way she expected. "I've been coming to Café Europa twice a week for the past 4 months, he continued, initially to assess whether it would be a viable investment opportunity. Tony leaned forward in his chair. "And what's your conclusion?" Mr. Chen was quiet for a moment and Maria held her breath. 4 months ago I would have recommended against any investment, he said honestly. The menu translations were confusing. Customer satisfaction seemed low, and I observed numerous instances of people leaving frustrated or ordering far less than they intended. Maria's heart sank. This was exactly what she'd feared. "However," Mr. Chen continued, and that single word changed everything. "Something remarkable happened about a month ago that completely altered my assessment." He turned to look directly at Maria, his eyes warm with gratitude and respect. "This young woman approached me one afternoon and, with more kindness and professionalism than I've seen in restaurants costing 10 times as much, helped me understand what I'd been trying to order for months, but she didn't stop there." Mr. Chen reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a carefully folded napkin, the original one Maria had written on weeks ago. "She created this," he said, showing it to Tony. "A complete translation of your most confusing menu items. And then, over the following weeks, I watched her discreetly help dozens of other customers in the same way." Tony stared at the napkin, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding, to something that might have been amazement. "Because of Maria's efforts," Mr. Chen continued, "I've seen your customer satisfaction improve dramatically. People stay longer, order more, and most importantly, they bring friends back with them. She single-handedly solved the primary problem that was driving customers away." Maria felt like she might cry from relief and embarrassment all at once. "So here's what I'd like to propose," Mr. Chen said, pulling several documents from his folder. "I'd like to buy Café Europa not to fix its problems, but to expand on the solutions Maria has already implemented. And I'd like her to be a central part of that expansion." The room fell silent except for the sound of Maria's heart pounding in her chest. Everything she'd feared was happening, but in ways she never could have imagined. Maria sat in the tiny office chair feeling like the world had tilted completely sideways. The words Mr. Chen had just spoken seemed to hang in the air around her, too big and impossible to fully understand. Her hands were still shaking as she stared at the business document spread across Tony's desk. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Could you say that again?" Mr. Chen's eyes were kind but serious as he leaned forward. "I'd like to offer you a position as Director of Cultural Experience for my restaurant group. Your starting salary would be 3 times what you're making now, and you'd be responsible for ensuring that every customer, regardless of their language or cultural background, feels welcome and understood in our establishments." Tony's jaw had practically hit the floor. He kept looking back and forth between Maria and Mr. Chen like he was watching a tennis match that made no sense. "But I don't understand," Tony said, shaking his head. "She's just a waitress. She takes orders and serves food. How is that worth? I mean, no offense, Maria, but this seems crazy." Mr. Chen pulled out another folder, this one filled with photographs and notes. "Let me show you exactly what Maria has accomplished in the past month." He spread out pictures he'd taken discreetly over the past few weeks. Photos of Maria helping the Spanish-speaking couple. Images of customers smiling as they looked at her handwritten translations. Shots of full tables where people were clearly enjoying complete meals instead of just coffee and pastries. In the 4 months before Maria started helping customers, Mr. Chen explained, I observed an average table spend of $12 per person, with most customers ordering only beverages and light snacks. Customer satisfaction appeared low, and very few people returned for second visits. He pulled out a small notebook filled with his careful observations. In the past month since Maria began her informal translation assistance, the average spend at tables she serves has increased to $38 per person. More importantly, customer return rates have increased by over 60%. Maria stared at the numbers, hardly believing what she was hearing. Her simple act of helping people understand the menu had created this much change. But that's not even the most impressive part, Mr. Chen continued. What really caught my attention was how Maria approaches each interaction. She doesn't just translate words, she helps people connect with the food and the experience. She makes recommendations based on what she learns about their preferences. She creates relationships. He pulled out his phone and showed them several online reviews that had been posted in recent weeks. Look at these. Maria read the first review with growing amazement. Found this gem of a cafe thanks to the most helpful waitress I've ever encountered. She took the time to explain every dish and helped me find exactly what I was craving. The food was delicious, but her service made the experience unforgettable. Coming back next week with friends, another review said. Finally, a restaurant where language barriers don't exist. The young woman who helped us made us feel so welcome. She even wrote down the names of dishes we loved so we could order them again. This is what hospitality should look like. There are dozens more like these, Mr. Chen said, all mentioning the same person. A kind, knowledgeable waitress who goes above and beyond to help customers feel comfortable and understood. Maria felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She'd been so worried about getting in trouble for helping customers that she'd never imagined anyone was noticing the positive effects. The truth is, Mr. Chen said, his voice growing warmer, I've been in the restaurant business for over 20 years. I've seen servers with perfect techniques, managers with impressive efficiency, and chefs with incredible skills. But I've rarely seen someone with Maria's natural ability to make people feel genuinely cared for. He turned to face her directly. That's not something you can teach in business school or learn from a training manual. That's a gift. And it's exactly what the restaurant industry needs more of. Tony was still processing everything. So you want to buy the cafe because of Maria? I want to buy the cafe and expand it because Maria has shown me that the original vision, a place where people from all cultures can feel welcome, is not only possible, but incredibly valuable. She's proven that with the right approach, this concept could work on a much larger scale. Mr. Chen pulled out what looked like architectural plans. I'm proposing to open 5 locations within the next year, all based on the model Maria has created here. Each restaurant would serve international cuisine with properly translated menus in multiple languages, staffed by people trained in cultural sensitivity and communication. Maria's mind was reeling. This was so much bigger than she'd ever imagined. But I don't know anything about running restaurants or managing people, she said, her old shyness creeping back in. You know the most important thing, Mr. Chen replied gently. You know how to make people feel welcome. Everything else can be learned. He explained that the position would allow her to continue her college studies while working. She'd travel to help set up new locations, train staff in cultural communication, and develop systems to ensure every customer had the kind of positive experience she'd been creating at Café Europa. What do you think? He asked. Maria looked around Tony's small, cluttered office, then out at the main dining room where she'd spent so many months quietly serving coffee and watching people struggle with the confusing menu. The same dining room where she'd finally found the courage to help one kind gentleman, leading to this moment that felt like something from a dream. I think, she said slowly, her voice growing stronger with each word. I think I'd like to try. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings and planning sessions. Mr. Chen officially purchased Café Europa, but instead of changing everything, he worked with Maria to implement her translation system properly. Her handwritten menus were professionally designed and printed in English, Spanish, French, and Italian. Staff were trained not just to take orders, but to help customers understand and enjoy their dining experience. The transformation was remarkable. Within a month, Café Europa had a waiting list for weekend reservations. Food bloggers started writing about the revolutionary approach to international dining. Other restaurant owners came by to observe how the cultural communication system worked. But for Maria, the most meaningful changes were smaller and more personal. She watched Mr. Chen finally order that shepherd's pie with complete confidence, knowing exactly what he was getting. She helped an elderly woman from Italy discover that the cafe served a pasta dish just like her grandmother used to make. She saw a family of refugees find comfort in food that reminded them of home, served by staff who took time to understand their story. 6 months after that life-changing conversation in Tony's office, Maria stood in the main dining room of the third International Kitchen location, watching the dinner rush with pride and amazement. The walls were decorated with flags from around the world, just like the original Café Europa. But now the international theme felt authentic rather than confusing. A young server approached her with a question about helping a customer who spoke only Portuguese, and Maria smiled as she went to assist. Training new staff had become one of her favorite parts of the job, teaching them that translation was about more than words. That true hospitality meant making every person feel valued and understood. On her desk in the small office upstairs, Maria kept 2 items that reminded her of how far she'd come. The first was her college diploma, which she'd finally completed with Mr. Chen's support and flexible work schedule. The second was that original napkin she'd written on for Mr. Chen that first Thursday afternoon, now framed and hanging next to a photo of all 5 restaurant locations. Sometimes, late at night when the restaurants were closed and she was reviewing plans for the next location, Maria would remember the shy girl who'd been too nervous to speak up about menu problems. That girl could never have imagined that her small act of kindness would grow into something that brought joy and connection to hundreds of customers every day. But perhaps the most beautiful part was that the original magic never disappeared. Even as Director of Cultural Experience, even with her business cards and meeting schedule and staff responsibilities, Maria still found time to sit with customers who looked confused or homesick. She still wrote translations on napkins sometimes, still helped people discover new foods, still created those small moments of connection that made dining out feel like coming home. The shy waitress had found her voice, and in doing so, she'd helped countless others find theirs too.